Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Godzilla Raids Again, or Godzilla's Counterattack from 1955. And this is starting off my 3-video series of films that followed up the original Godzilla film. Of the 3 different series, every time it was rebooted, it was used as a follow-up to the original Godzilla film from 1954, and this is the very first sequel, actually, Godzilla Raids Again, or Godzilla's Counterattack. Like most movie studios, Toho eagerly wanted a sequel to Godzilla because it was making tons and tons of money. And they rushed it into production, which is normal. But they managed to rush it into production so quickly, it was actually released within 5 months, almost 6 months of the release of the original film. The original film was released in November of 1954. This was released in April of 1955. That's an incredibly quick turnaround, and they couldn't get much of the creative team who appeared in the original film, and Ishiro Honda was busy. The composer of the original film was busy, because why would they have thought they were going to have to make a sequel so quickly? And this film really shows, unfortunately, and the director they picked, who is Motoyoshi Oda, was known more for his quick turnaround than for being an auteur. He actually did work as an assistant director for Ishiro Honda earlier, but he was actually signed to Toho and he had to make 7 films a year under his contract because he was apparently so good at doing that. 2 pilots from a fishing company are flying, and one of them runs out of gas, lands on an island. They find Godzilla, but then quickly discover it's not just Godzilla, it's also Anguirus. Then they're fighting together because they don't like each other, because Anguirus was apparently, when they go back to identify and go through some books about dinosaurs, they see that Anguirus, his kind of dinosaurs, hated warlike dinosaurs like Godzilla, so they have to fight. But this film is actually the first film with 2 kaiju who actually fight each other. It's actually notorious for that, and something that would be in all of the Godzilla sequels would be Godzilla fighting another monster, and this was the very first film to actually ever do that. They're worried because at first they bring in Takashi Shimura's character from the first film to talk about Godzilla and his effects, and how this is probably a different Godzilla than the first film, but then they kind of don't really acknowledge that throughout the rest of the movie. It's just that one part. But then he attacks Osaka with Anguirus and they fight it out in an R8 sequence, and then they have to figure out a way to take both of them out, and definitely Godzilla, before he comes back and destroys more cities. Since this film had such a quick production schedule, I will have to say I find it impressive that they actually finished this film in such a quick amount of time, and that it is at least something. But it really doesn't have the care and the artistry that the first film had, and the impressive special effects. The special effects are impressive since they got it done so quickly, but if you didn't know what it took to make this movie, it doesn't really stand on its own without that fact. And it doesn't really have the same kind of grim, nuclear bomb incarnate tone that the first Godzilla had. It's more just kind of a standard B movie, and it relies a lot on the beast from 20,000 Fathoms and the kind of the cliches that that film started. The first Godzilla really takes on the monster movie genre and does something with it, makes it mean something, and makes it emotionally mean something. And this film just is a simple genre film, and it's basically like the kind of film that most people expect from a Godzilla film, like a kind of a silly, stupid, escapist monster movie that isn't really trying to say anything. And this film isn't really trying to say anything. It was a rushed into production monster movie that's really just there to have another monster fight. You don't really see anyone die of a monster attack. You see some planes that Godzilla breathes fire on. You see him destroy buildings with Argulus, and even Argulus is kind of a superfluous character. It mainly feels like he's just there to give the action sequences something that the first film didn't have, but it doesn't give it enough that you'd at all be interested in this film. And Argulus, he's kind of a weaker villain because in this film I don't have any real connection to either of the monsters the way I did in the first film, and they just feel like kind of just monsters, you know. There's no connection to them. They're not really well-rounded characters, either of them. Even Godzilla, who this film is more about, Argulus is really just slapped on there. It really works like most sequels, where they try to attach a ton of new characters and it just kind of clutters the movie, and it doesn't work as well as the original. And certainly this film had to live in the shadow of a very impressive and probably one of the most impressive monster movies ever made, and that it was made so quickly to follow up that film was pretty unfair, and it was kind of an impossible feat to do. But this film really fails at it, and I don't really like it very much. I actually hadn't seen this film before. I'd seen kind of the color Godzilla films that would start about 8 years later, but this film, I never had really heard of it before, looking into like what is the film that followed the original Godzilla. And when I did, I was like kind of curious because I didn't know there was another black and white Godzilla movie. It just felt like they didn't really treat the subject matter in the same way that they treated it in the first film. They spent a lot of money. Toho really tried to make the film as good as it possibly could, make this impressive spectacle, and this just feels like a cheap drive-in movie that the kids would see and eat popcorn and talk over, and it really wouldn't matter to them, and it wouldn't grab them. There's nothing to really grab you, and the human storyline just feels like that average kind of giant monster human storyline that you'd probably fast forward in the advent of VCRs. Now, this film was released in the summer of 1959 in America as Gigantus the Fire Monster, because someone there decided, hey, you know what's a good idea? We have a sequel to a really successful movie. Let's not name it Godzilla. Let's name it Gigantus the Fire Monster, because of Argulis, I guess. I'm not exactly sure why they called it that, what the deal was. Apparently it played as a double bill with Teenagers from Space, and it seemed like they treated it with about as much respect as Toho treated making the actual movie. It actually didn't do well, probably because people didn't realize it was a Godzilla movie. Why would you mess that up? Now studios are very controlling over franchises and making sure they have the right people in them and the right director, and they spend enough time to make a movie that people will enjoy so they can have a third and fourth movie. And at this time, this was clearly just a cash in, and that's really what it is. It's not trying to do the grim tone. It's not really trying to mean anything. It's not having you deal with the devastation. It's like one shot of the devastation that looked like it was from the original film. It doesn't show you the victims of it. Supposedly everyone got out in time. Okay, what kind of fantasy world are we actually living in that you think that that would be anywhere really appropriate in comparison to the first film? It did well in Japan, not critically, and the fans didn't like it, but didn't do very well in America. And it didn't really live up to the first film at all. If you're seeing this movie and the human subplot sucks, you're at least like, well, I get to see these giant monsters fight. That part is always very cool. The monster fight isn't very good. They sped it up a lot of times. Like, I don't think Godzilla needed to be Benny Hill-esque, really. They made his suit smaller so he could do more stuff, but it felt like he was just like too physical and he was too quick, and like it just felt like two guys wearing rubber suits fighting. It didn't feel like the first film where he had some weight to him. There's real physical performance under that suit, and in this film I didn't really feel the same way about it. It just wasn't directed as well. It wasn't as impressive visually, and you know, it's kind of odd. Why wouldn't they wait till 1956 or 1957 to make, and wait for Ishiro Honda to be available and the composer to be available? The score really wasn't as good. I found this film to be really disappointing. It was really hard to be connected to anyone because the human plot, which goes through most of it, is about a fishing company that's so removed from it, and as soon as Osaka gets destroyed, they go to a different city so they don't have to live in what happened for the first Godzilla attack. And like the big attack fight between the two monsters is kind of like at the end of, I guess you could say it's like the end of the second act, and then the film goes on and there's nothing as good as that sequence. And it feels random when you're watching it, because I was like, oh well, if this sequence is here, the sequence towards the end will be really awesome, because no one in their right mind would blow the big action sequence right now, but this film does. The problem everyone used to have with sequels is they were simply just cash-ins. I mean, sequels are cash-ins by definition, but they used to be really just cash-ins, especially at this time, and they didn't really care about the artistry to it. And I think Toho in this example really didn't. I don't know why they didn't wait, and it's kind of unfortunate because it shows why people have this view of Godzilla films and monster movies and kaiju movies, is because they see stuff like this and like, well, yeah, but like this doesn't mean anything. This is kind of silly. I do like the character of Godzilla. I really liked him in the first film from 1954, but this film is just not very good. Apparently it was re-released on video as Godzilla Raids Again when VHS happens. So that seems to, I'm not sure what the title of this movie is. People use Godzilla Raids Again and Godzilla's Counterattack, so it's a little confusing. Probably Godzilla Raids Again, because that seems to be the most popular one. It took Toho 8 years to realize they needed to bring Godzilla back after this. And this just felt like an assignment picture by kind of a hack director, a film that was really just made more for the finances than the artistry to it. And it just comes out like the B movie that everyone feels Godzilla movies are, rather than the first film that's the exception to the rule. This film is the rule, and it shows like how kind of boring and lifelessly directed that can be. And it's just really an unfortunately bad sequel to a very, very good movie. So if you have seen Godzilla Raids Again or Godzilla's Counterattack and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. The next film in my Godzilla series running this week, ending with a review of the new Godzilla film that will be coming to theaters this Friday, will be 1984's The Return of Godzilla. And I hope to see you then. That will be tomorrow, and thank you for watching.